I think, when you're working in a high stress job and you are just so used to work, 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 you forget that like sometimes sharing what you're going through personally is actually very helpful because it allows people around you to kind of give you grace when you need it.
Welcome to Say This, Not That, your guide for what to say and what to avoid when people are grieving, struggling, or simply going through life's tougher moments. This new project that I'm kicking off is all about helping people navigate the tough situations we find ourselves in life. And nobody's ever going to be perfect, but the hope with this is that we can learn from one another's stories and examples, both to realize that we're not alone, but to get a bit of a playbook for maybe what to say in certain circumstances where we may not have the words for it. So I'm delighted to welcome Nicole to the podcast. Nicole is a senior account executive at Google, longtime successful salesperson at Google. We worked together. She worked on my team for a while, and it was just delightful to have her on the team because she has such a amazing perspective on the business and a great ability to connect with her clients and her coworkers. And Nicole is just a wonderful human being and a fantastic mom and daughter, and she's navigated a lot in her life, and I'm sure she'll share some of those stories. But I was excited for her to join the podcast for that. And I can't resist sharing this because this was a fun fact for me. She is an absolute French fry aficionado. If you're ever
True.
looking for the spot to get the best French fries of any and all varieties, and I believe she even did you have a French fry bar at your wedding as well?
I sure did.
Yeah. So, welcome, Nicole. Please introduce yourself as well in case I left anything out.
No, I think you covered it and you're too kind. But yes, I love how you threw in my French fry aficionado comment. I did have a French fry bar. It was probably the best decision outside of marrying my husband the day of my wedding. But yeah, no, I think you hit on all the main points, and I really do love the topic of the conversation for today. And my hope is that folks, listening to this, watching this, will get something out of it.
Excellent. So let's start there. I love to start these conversations with the positive side of say this, giving people examples of what they can say. And maybe you can set the stage for us with a story about a situation you found yourself in where somebody said or did something that was helpful.
Yeah, so just a little background of my situation. So, as Kristen mentioned, I'm a mom of two, and recently, up until 9 months ago, a mom of two under two. And yeah, crazy. The exhaustion was real over the past 2 years and continues to be. But I will say, like, in being a caregiver as a mom is one thing, right? But actually, about 3 years ago, before I had my first child, Cameron, my mom got diagnosed with stage four breast cancer. And it was very much a surprise, not something that we expected, especially given her age. She was 47 at the time. Um, and I remember when hearing the news, it was actually during Christmas time. And I was supposed to be going to Paris for the first time for New Year's. And I remember getting the news about 2 weeks prior, and it was obviously very surprising, but just a lot to take in. And I've never experienced anyone close to me um, with a cancer diagnosis. So you hear about it, right?
Yeah.
It's always going to be a unsettling feeling, but you never know how to handle and like what to really expect. And actually, Kristen, you were my manager at this time. And I remember sharing the news with you over email because it was during the holidays. We weren't online and it was the weekend. And I said, hey, like I know I was supposed to be off for a couple of weeks in January, but I actually just found out about my mom. Um, and I remember you actually did say in your email, listen, take time for yourself and just prepare. People are going to say dumb shit. And it was funny when you said that because I said, huh, that's interesting. But you were right. And when I returned from when everybody when we returned from the holidays, right? It was once we found out the cancer diagnosis, you then have to go through multiple tests. Like my mom had to go through multiple tests to understand like what the action plan was. And you don't realize how critical that time is.
Mm.
Um, And as a primary caregiver for her, and given that I am type A, I mean, a lot of us at Google are, I was very involved in the process. And I remember returning to work, and we were still in the midst of booking doctor's appointments, figuring out which, institution we were going to move forward with. I wanted her at Sloan, but there were multiple breast surgeons that we were getting second opinions from. And I remember the first thing you said to me was, I'm forcing you to take time off, and this is going to be your last day. You're going to take 2 weeks of carer's leave. And I tell people this story all the time because at that time, I didn't realize how important those 2 weeks were. And the 2 weeks were filled with multiple doctor's appointments, figuring out like which doctor to move forward with, making all of these calls because while we have a great medical system in the US, I learned self advocacy is so important. And trying to get her an appointment at one of the top institutions near us, which is Sloan Kettering, it was insane. And I had to actually call them and, name drop in order just for my mom to get seen. And so, to kind of answer your question, and that was very long winded, it's honestly, I feel like you were very helpful and you encouraging me and forcing me to actually take the time off because I know you experienced a similar situation with your friend, and until you go through it, you don't realize the time that you need once you receive the diagnosis when you're the caregiver of like really figuring out what the action plan is. And so, yeah, for me, I think one of the things that you said and did as a manager was very helpful, which was forcing me to take the time to really support my mom during the process and be involved. Like I really did want to be.
That's very kind of you to say, and I'm glad in this instance it worked out for you to for us to be at an organization at Google at the time that had that ability, right? That had the carers leave flexibility. I know not everybody's lucky enough to have that option in their companies, but I just felt at the time that having, as you mentioned, having gone through that and been a primary caregiver for my best friend who had battled ovarian cancer, that I knew some of what that could be. And if I could create the time and space for you, that hopefully it would be helpful. And so I guess one of my takeaways for managers too is to just acknowledge that even if you don't have that leave option and employees can't take big blocks of time, know what they may be going through during that window of time, and are there ways for you to redistribute some of the work in order to be able to free people up to spend the time and energy with their family. Because you've probably heard me say this sometimes. We weren't saving lives. On another episode of this podcast, I was interviewing a pediatric occupational therapist who works in an ICU, and we talked about how in a lot of cases she is dealing with life and death situations, and in this case, advertising was not, and
Yeah.
so important to spend the time with your family.
Yeah. And I think to the point about, manager, like this is something that managers should really take away. I think what I realized in that moment and what I'm realizing as I'm continuing in my career is that a really effective manager knows their team and I think knows their strengths, their weaknesses. And I'll say for me, and I think you know this about me, my weakness is knowing when to turn it off. And I think as a manager, it's important to know that about your people because it's such a easy thing to say, when somebody's going through something of like, let me know how I can support. But 9 out of 10 times, no one really says like, I actually would need the support. Nobody really raises their hand unless it's forced. So, yeah, I definitely think, learning from what you did in my situation will help a lot of people.
Yeah, thanks for saying that. I'm a big believer in the idea of careers are marathons, not sprints. And
Yeah.
so when you have the good fortune of working with great, highly capable people who are really strong performers, it's important to think about, okay, what's going to be the best for the long run? And there's another friend of mine that talks about recharging your phone battery, right? Like what happens to an iPhone when it gets to that certain level of depletion. And yeah, you could keep running it on that low battery power, but if you plug it in, and sometimes it only needs 10, 20 minutes for that charge, that'll at least get it back up to three-quarters of the way charged. And so that can make a big difference. And so I try to operate with that mentality.
Yeah,
Are
couldn't agree
there
more.
are there other things that you encountered? You referenced the comment in the email about people saying dumb shit. How did that manifest for you
Oh
along the
gosh.
way?
Yeah. I really didn't believe you when you said that. I was like, how? I mean, it's pretty simple. Like, it's a not so great news to get, right? And people will know what to say. But yeah, I encountered more people saying the wrong things than saying the right things, surprisingly. And so I know one of the questions you were asking too is like, what are the phrases or certain words not to say? And I think the one common thing that I've heard from folks is at least. And so, for example, like when I shared that my mom got cancer or was diagnosed with cancer at 47, I'm like, well, oh, at least she's young. They definitely caught it early. In fact, that was not the case. She was young, but it was already, stage 4 at that point. Or at least your mom's young, she'll be able to fight it. No cancer diagnosis is easy to really handle, right? Like, as you know from seeing your very dear friend, it's watching someone that you love and you care about go through that, whether you're young, you're old, it takes a toll on your body. And I think for the caregiver themselves, the fact that they're not the ones physically sick is hard because I think mentally watching someone you love, you might not be the person physically sick, but the emotional toll that it takes on the caregiver is a lot. In terms of just like you wish you could help, right? And there's nothing that you can do outside of just really be there. And so I think people downplaying it or saying the words, at least it's not X, or at least there's an option, right? Like, given that she was stage 4, at least there was a treatment plan. Well, yes, we are very grateful for that. But whether it's stage 1 or stage 4, whether there's a treatment plan or there's not, I think it's important to always acknowledge that no cancer diagnosis or news is ever easy to hear. And so now for me, like I've had um, more people, like especially given that a lot of our parents are at the ages of like between 50 to 80, like more of my friends have been having similar situations with their parents. And I've been very cognizant of just acknowledging whether it's stage 1 or whether it was just, a fall and they were hospitalized. Like, seeing somebody that you love and seeing a parent and being a caregiver is no easy in any situation. So I think just acknowledging that versus at least it's not X or could be worse, I think is important to know.
That is great guidance. So at least put that on the list of
Yes.
not that. Like, when you do find yourself in these situations now where you're encountering your friends in your community that may be struggling with caregiving for their own parents, have you found a few words that become your go to?
Um, yeah, I mean, I think always knowing and acknowledging that it's not easy is important, which I've alluded to. But in all honesty, I feel like the actions speak louder than words. And I say that because you can say all of the right things, right? But what's been helpful for me is, and what I've tried to, do myself when I'm in similar situations with friends and even coworkers, is like send them food, right? Send them flowers, like let them know you're thinking of them. Sometimes people just like want a reason to smile when they're going through such a difficult time. And I remember like a few of my friends sent me and my mom just like a gift card to, go to dinner, or sent me flowers personally. And even though they didn't say any, like, they didn't have to directly text me or say anything, I think some of those actions just actually help more than just the words themselves.
Yes, that makes a lot of sense. I've heard that a few times. And so I think we often underestimate that what presence can mean of the just being there and being
Hmm.
with and the actions. Somebody mentioned the other day that it made them feel seen made them
Yeah.
feel understood by the people that care about them, that they recognized, oh yeah, we know that something's going on for you, and we're here supporting you.
Yeah, and I think too, something that I've realized is a lot of people don't want to repeat the same story when they're going through it every day, right? And so I feel like that's why when I say actions speak louder than words, is that, when you're checking in on someone and you want to say, like, how's your mom doing? Oh, what did the doctor last say? It's like, well, I'm living through it. I've probably repeated it 10 times at this point, right? And so I think just even if you're going to say a simple text or simple words, it's just, I'm here for you. I know you probably don't want to talk about it, but I'm here for you. So I found like those things have been helpful and something that I've tried to remember myself when somebody else is going through it.
That's a great one. I'm here for you.
Yeah.
Say this, right? Say I'm here for you. And I also like that you included, you probably don't want to talk about it. You may not
Yeah.
want to talk about it. I'm always interested in examples, because I try to find them for myself as well, of things that I could, if I'm sending a text, how to let people know that there's no need for response. How do I send something where it's a
Yes.
one message only?
Oh, yes. I couldn't agree more. And especially like, right, like not a lot of people are vulnerable. I mean, I know I'm not. It's something that I'm working on for sure, but it's, when you're dealt with a very, difficult situation, when somebody's not very comfortable of being vulnerable themselves and sharing, having to feel like you have to share multiple times, and it's coming from a good place. But yeah, I agree. Just like a one sentence, few words of like, I'm here for you, don't need to respond, um, is sometimes helpful.
You talk about the idea of, it's coming from a good place. I think that's
Yeah.
important. I think that's what I've certainly found in this project too. This is not to call people out. It's to acknowledge that even when we are well intentioned, we're going to make mistakes. And even though some of us have been through it, I've certainly continued to make mistakes. Occasionally I try to do better, and that's the point of this project, is to give some people examples of what to try in hopefully connecting better. But if you are on the receiving end of those questions and you do feel drained and unable to retell a story, have you figured out a line or two that you're able to respond with that seems to protect your sanity a little bit, and um, maybe stop the person from continuing to inquire a ton?
Yeah. Um, you know, when at first it was like to the point where I was just ignoring my friends when they would follow up. And then I
Yeah.
realized, I think there was a better way that I could handle it, right? Like the whole experience, and it continues to be a learning experience for me because, my mom is still going through it. So now it's been 3 years, and I've learned a lot about myself during this time. And I was always the person where, like, if I was dealing with a difficult situation or I felt like somebody was frustrating me, I would just ignore. Um,
Okay.
and to your point earlier, it's like I've realized like people genuinely are coming from a good place. And until you've gone through this experience, nobody realizes like how nobody understands how to really handle it. Or, me not responding could be received as, oh, that person's mad at me. Where it's just like truly, I'm just to your point, like just drained, exhausted. I don't feel like texting. And, I'm also a mom of two. So it's not only a caregiver for my mom, but I'm a parent. And so I've found just saying, a simple thank you, I'll reach out when I have time. It's not you, I've just been super busy, has been helpful because at the end of the day, you also you also want the support, but you just don't always have the energy to talk and like get the support at the same time, if that makes sense. So it's finding the balance of just being able to communicate when you're just going through it and you don't have the energy to respond, but you appreciate them acknowledging and reaching out.
I think that makes a ton of sense. That's super helpful. The thank you, and I'll get back to you another time.
Yeah.
Keeping them, knowing that you acknowledge their presence as well, but that there's only so much that you can do. I wonder if you can say a few words about 3 years later. Is there something that you've figured out that has been really helpful for you as a caregiver as that's evolved?
Yeah, creating boundaries. And
Mm.
it was, I think, uh, you know, it's interesting because when I first found out, right, Kristen, I knew about your situation, but I didn't really know how involved you were, right? Like you were a primary caregiver yourself. And I remember you sharing with me, and I also thought this was weird until I went through it myself, was, you know, taking your mom to your chemo treatments will actually be a memorable experience, like quality time and something that you'll cherish. And I was like, what? Like, these are going to be horrible days, like exhausting for my mom. It's going to be horrible seeing her in this condition. But you were right. Like, so I say that to say, like, for me, it's creating boundaries in the sense of, like, I'm a mom. I'm also a full-time working mom that has a, demanding job. And figuring out like what really fills my cup. And I think that it's been a learning experience for me because I was honestly draining myself from trying to just go 110% of being a great mom 110% of the time, being a great daughter 110% of the time, and also like crushing it at work. It's not feasible. No matter who says it, who tries it, something's always going to be like lacking. Um, and so for me, it's like really, actually, this happened at the beginning of this year where I felt like I was just at a point of diminishing return because I started a new job and it was peak season. So it was
Mm.
demanding at the time. And also, I just have two kids. One just started walking. So, and my mom just got the diagnosis of, her cancer was back in her brain. So it was just a lot. And I remember sitting there and my husband looked at me and said, like, this isn't what you're doing isn't feasible. Like you're running out of steam. Like think about what really fills your cup. And I thought to myself, it's, making sure that I'm able to take my mom to her treatment or chemo treatments. Like that's important to me because, when you said that it's quality time spent together, it truly is. Like we now have when we go there or together, it's the drive there, right? We get our coffee in the morning. I make sure she eats there. So it's like half the time we're figuring out and fighting with each other, like, what are we gonna have for lunch today? And eating, trying out new places and just sharing stories with each other. Because if you think about it, your life just goes so fast. And while, it's not a happy time of her sitting there getting her infusion, but like we're actually pausing and like we're having to have conversations because we're forced to sit there for 2 hours. So it really is like something that weirdly does fill my cup and something I genuinely want to do. And then outside of that, it's like spending time with my kids. And so, especially with, a lot of um, corporate companies forcing us to go back to work, right? Like I also have a 2 hour, basically an hour and a half, 2 hour commute each way. And so for me, it's making sure that nobody books meetings at past 4 o'clock because I want to be able to come home and actually spend the time with my kids. Um, and my husband, he's also important. But I think for me, it's just creating the barriers and like really sitting down and thinking about what fills my cup because I still want to work, but I also want to make sure that like I'm I'm doing things as a caregiver for both my mom and my kids that um feels right to me and like things that I want to do and making that time.
What a great strategy to focus on what fills your cup. And shout out to Pat, your husband, right? For take for no, but for caring
Yeah.
and having the courage to point it out in a caring way that was supportive and saying, how could we find a solution to this? You made that comment about spending time with your mom at chemo. It was similar for me with my best friend that yeah, it's not fun and happy times and it's not comfortable for the patient, but at the same time life is life on some level, and whether you're deciding what to have for lunch, there are opportunities for some laughs and some levity
Yeah.
and or some moments of connection at any in any day. Any of us actually have that opportunity in any given day. But sometimes when we're presented with these really difficult illnesses, it puts it into perspective. And so it's can yeah, it doesn't all have to be painful and
Yeah.
suffering. There can be a
Bright
combination
spots.
of things going on like at the same time. I actually heard, I forget if this was on a podcast or somebody was talking about it, the idea of just laughter, of just the power of laughter and how
Yeah.
contagious laughter can be. And they were saying, they were talking about somebody's stand up and they were like, oh no, bloopers. They were talking about the power of bloopers. That's what it was, about how hilarious bloopers can be and how watching sitcom bloopers or whatever can just crack people up. And their idea was, in chemo infusion centers, they should play blooper reels just on
Oh,
loop,
wow.
because what would that mean
Yeah.
for the levity that that might create?
Oh, 100%. Yeah. And it becomes like a thing, right? Like she's been going every 3 weeks for the past 3 years. And so you then get the same nurses that, you become friendly with. And so, and like the valet person that is there, like he always is playing Sinatra. And to your point, it's just I feel like Sloan has done such a great job of hiring the right people, like given the situation. And I think to your point, it's like it doesn't all have to be doom and gloom. Like we already know the situation's shitty. Like figuring out ways to still find some laughter, I think is important. And so, yeah, I think again, you were right in the sense of those chemo infusion days with my mom have actually been a great opportunity to create memories.
It's nice of you to say that. I hear that and think it's less about me being right. I'm just grateful that an experience that was really challenging on a lot of levels, that by sharing that, it sounds like
Hmm.
it's had a little bit of help down the line in your case. And so I'm just grateful for that, because that's what fuels these conversations that we're having too.
Yeah,
Right? Is the hope is that in sharing these conversations, some of how you're approaching setting boundaries and filling your cup and identifying what really brings you energy can help the next person that has a chance to listen to this.
100%.
Have you encountered situations at work? You know, you juggle a lot with a really high powered job. How have you managed that, or have you encountered things of that people have said or done that have been, helpful or hurtful along the way there, or just, I guess, just any additional guidance that you might say from things that you've encountered? And
Yeah. You know, um, I know I mentioned this earlier, but um, I'm not good at wearing my being super vulnerable. And I think when you're going through something personally and you're not the type of person that likes to really wear your emotions on your sleeve, you don't always want to share what you're going through. And what I've
you're
been
not
learned,
obligated to, right? You're not,
no,
and you don't have to either. So yeah.
no, you definitely don't. But I realized sharing it is actually more helpful than you think.
Mm.
And so I say that because, unless people know what you're going through, they don't really know how to help you. And so I think for me, being more comfortable, and I'm not saying you have to share with every single person at work and every single person you meet, but sharing it with your core team, I think is always very helpful because having them understand, like, okay, every 3 weeks, they know on Mondays I'm at chemo with my mom, not to schedule appointments. And also just when things come up, such as like, as when you're going through chemo treatment, sometimes they can get sick, which requires hospitalization. So there's just so many doctor's appointments you have to juggle. And I think, when you're working in a high stress job and you are just so used to work, 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 you forget that like sometimes sharing what you're going through personally is actually very helpful because it allows people around you to kind of give you grace when you need it, because there's all these different work deadlines, but we're not saving lives. So if you have to push a CMO meeting because, you were at the hospital with your mom the day prior, that's okay. And then unless people that work closely to you know that, they can't help you or push you to, you know, uh, extend deadlines for things that aren't, you know, life threatening. So I think it's important to feel the power and like feel more comfortable in sharing that if you can. Um, but yeah, I've definitely encountered a lot of people saying the wrong things. For example, like I mentioned, I have two kids under two. That was intentional. And that's because, my uh I feel and I know, right, with my mom's diagnosis that we're living with like borrowed time essentially. And for me, it's always been important for my kids to know my mom and remember her. And so, having kids and having my kids back to pack was just because I don't know what the future holds for my mom. And seeing her with my first was amazing. Like it honestly brings her so much light. The day after chemo is always the worst, the first few days for her. And no matter how exhausted she is, sometimes I just bring my son just so that she can laugh and be happy. Um, just because he just makes her so happy. And so I think because I had kids back to back and, very grateful for the company that I work for, like we have such great maternity leave. So that involved me basically being out of pocket for 14 months. Um, and I remember returning and hearing from somebody that I work with, like, there was, who didn't really know me well, like, hey, like, so great to have you back. I know you do great work. I've heard great things about you, but I don't know because like you've been on mat leave for basically 2 years. And I remember hearing that and I was like, God, I really worked so hard. And if only he knew how much I worked 5 years prior, right, to me starting a family. And if only he knew why, I don't think he would have said that. So I think those things, I share that because you never really know what someone's going through. And I think just being more mindful in how you phrase things, and especially as a woman, right? Like my husband only had to take 2 months of paternity leave. And so he got to continue his momentum with his career, but I basically had to pause mine for 2 years. And no matter what anybody says, those 2 years make a difference. And they say it doesn't, but it does. And no matter how much you work leading up to it, it's almost like you have to reprove yourself when you return, which shouldn't be the case, but it is. And so I think just being mindful of how you phrase certain things because you never really know why somebody is having kids back to back or, why somebody may have taken a carer's leave. Um, and so just being more mindful in how you position things and thinking about like asking more questions versus just having a straight response sometimes. I think is helpful because yeah, I remember hearing that and I was like, wow, did I everything I did the past 5 years for this job, I guess just like went to shit.
What's a question that's a good example of what you're describing that the person
Yeah.
might have asked you rather than
How is it having two kids under two? Like I think it just acknowledging, like, come on, uh, it's it's just I think just coming off with I've heard you've done great work, but I don't know because you've been gone for 2 years. I just think that was a very you know, mindless response where it's just like it's an exciting time, right? Like I'm growing my family. It's ask me how that's been. And I think by asking those types of questions sometimes will help you uncover maybe the reason why or like maybe you'll uncover like it's been really hard and I'm returning to work here and I'm still trying to figure it out. So yeah, I think asking more questions versus just like making statements. um yeah.
do you think that if that person had said, "Oh, I've heard you've done great work. I'm excited to work with you," as opposed to framing it the other way, would that have landed differently?
Oh, for sure, for sure. Because if you think about it, it's just, especially being the female, like there's nothing that I can do. Like I have to be the one that carries the baby, right? Out of my husband and and I would do it 10 times over again. Like I absolutely like my favorite job genuinely is being a mom. Um, and I think that that shouldn't be something that basically negates all of the work that you've done prior to becoming a mom. And so that framing of, you know, how that person said it was just hard to hear and almost just made me feel like everything that I had done prior to starting a family was essentially just devalued or not recognized. But yeah, I agree. Like if it was framed that way, it definitely would have been received a lot better.
Makes sense. And for context, not many people were as successful as Nicole at Google in the role that she was in. Talk about long term strategic planning. She unlocked relationships at an account that was notoriously difficult and came up with this idea for how to unlock a whole different investment level and worked diligently and then got the recurring revenue for a long period of time. I mean, it became a case study and a model for other teams to learn from. So the idea that anybody would question her capabilities is staggering for somebody who actually had the chance to observe the reality of what it was like to work with her.
Thank you, Kristen.
Nicole, as we're winding this down, anything else that comes to mind that you want to be sure that we share with the audience?
Yeah, I think one other thing, and I've alluded to this, but I don't think I've said it directly. As a caregiver, I've realized the one thing that people forget is taking care of the caregiver themselves. And so, you know, for me, it's I've been so focused on obviously being a mom and caring for my kids, and then from, you know, taking care of my mom, like she's the one physically sick, right? And so I've been constantly like just caring about her. And I think in the midst of everything, sometimes you forget that you also still have to care for yourself. And so just doubling down on how important it is to sit down and identify ways to how do you like what are things that fill your cup. One of the other things I do is wake up at 5 a.m. every morning to work out. It's the 1 hour that nobody needs me, and I need that mentally. So I think for other caregivers, it's just knowing that you're also important and don't forget to take care of yourself. And I think it's so easy to forget how, you know, to think about how to care for yourself in the midst of everything. So, yeah, it's just, and you know, for friends and coworkers, like check in on them. You know, like I think they're always probably on a hamster wheel going 100 miles per hour, and so sometimes when other people check in on them, like my husband did with me, it allows them to kind of take a step back and be like, "Wow, I am doing a lot. How can I figure out how to do less so that I'm not spreading myself too thin?"
All excellent points. And I think, especially, I mean, having known you before your kids and your mom's diagnosis too, I mean, you would always talk about the role of movement or fitness or different
Yeah.
activities for your health and well-being broadly, right? It was something that you genuinely, I think, enjoyed incorporating into your day or found that it was really helpful. And I think that especially as caregivers, sometimes we underestimate the importance of movement. And I'm not even going to say working out because I have this great friend and coach who is an expert at this. And she says movement makes your mind better. And I think that if you can carve out the time like you're talking about and do whatever you're doing, Pilates or whatever the case may be, do that because it's going to go so far for your ability to be the best caregiver that you can to both your kids and your parents. But if you can't, give yourself some credit for, okay, maybe park the car a little farther and walk, right? Maybe, take the kids and do something and sort of credit the fact that you're picking them up and they're just as heavy as the dumbbells that you might find in the gym. And so
Especially
there's
my
all
oldest.
kinds of ways.
Oh gosh.
there's all kinds of ways to incorporate movement or getting
Yeah.
outside and getting some fresh air. And even if you can only carve out small amounts depending on the intensity of your caregiving at different points in time in your life, that don't let it go to zero if at all possible. Keep it at some level, and then you can increase it over time.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, and it's been helpful. But listen, like I feel like you said, you we learned so much going through this process, and I think, it's always something new, especially with my mom being diagnosed with stage 4. It's not like one treatment and then you're done. It's like one treatment and then something else comes up. And so I think you just learn a lot about yourself. You learn a lot about how to best utilize your time, and then what I've learned most important is like the things that are important in life. And so it's unfortunate that a lot of times you don't have the opportunity to really sit and find that out before something like this happens. But yeah,
That's great. The one question that I've been asking folks, is there anything that you've said or done that you think, ugh, I wish I hadn't said that? Because I find that we're all fumbling our way through sometimes.
yeah. I actually did it recently. One of my colleagues shared that one of her dear friends got um, diagnosed with breast cancer, actually, the same one as my mom. And we were chatting, and she had mentioned that, they caught it early. And I caught myself. I responded and I said, "Oh, well, luckily they caught it early, so hopefully." And then I immediately texted her back and I said, I just realized I said luckily when, regardless of the stage, like I can't imagine how she's feeling and how you're feeling. And so it's just like I said, you don't realize how some things can be received until you've gone through it. But it's interesting you asked that question because I put my foot in my mouth just last week and I said that. I was like, God, I that's like the one thing I hated hearing, and I just said that myself. And so I'm glad that was I was able to catch myself and acknowledge that that wasn't the best response.
I'm glad you shared that, because that, what a great example of the need to give ourselves grace and
Yeah,
to recognize that even if you've been through things and you may know better, it's hard to constantly deliver on that. And so to give
yeah,
everybody some grace, and good that if you do recognize that, hey, this could be better, or maybe you've said something and maybe you listen to one of these episodes and realize, oh, I think it could be different. Kudos to you for reaching back out to clarify things with her and just try to continue to leave an open door of communication and connection between the two of you.
no, 100%. Yeah.
Well, thanks so much, Nicole. This has been so helpful. I'm really grateful for you taking the time to share your experiences, and I know it'll make a difference for people that are listening.
Well, thank you for giving me the opportunity. Like I said, I haven't been always good at being vulnerable, but I think over the past 3 years, and kudos to, you were a big help for me on this, is just like sharing your story actually does in fact help others. And so I'm glad you're doing this, and I hope sharing the story can help people understand things to say and not to say.
Amazing. Thanks for listening to Say This, Not That, the podcast that helps you learn how to show up better and connect with one another in life's tough moments. If this episode gave you something to think about, hit subscribe and stick with us to learn more. Until next time.